Hello and welcome to Aldi's Mamia and Me podcast. I'm Jen Hogan and today I'm joined by holistic sex educator Jenny Keane, otherwise known as the Orgasm Queen. There's a title and a half, Jenny.
I know.
The Orgasm Queen is pregnant. Tell me how you doing. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Yeah, I feel brilliant. Yeah, loving my maternity pants.
They're the best.
Life in maternity pants are brilliant. That's all I have to say.
This is the thing they don't focus enough on. The
Yeah.
maternity pants, the joys of being able to, you know, to have space, to breathe comfortably, just comfort, to have that excuse for comfort.
Absolutely, yeah. And I just love, I'm really enjoying the experience as well. And part of me is like, oh, I don't want it to be over so soon.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. No, because people talk about, you know, you're nearly there, as if, you know, you've survived, you've got through it. But I was like that. I kind of, not that I did. I kind of enjoyed being pregnant. I mean, there were parts of it I didn't like. You know, I didn't like being cumbersome, and I didn't like morning sickness. I didn't like stuff like that, and some of the worries that went with it. But it's still a really special experience, isn't it? It's that, and you're still going, I can't believe my body's doing this.
Yeah,
like, I can't.
I also feel like my body is changing so much, like from week to week. Yeah. And it's just I'm like, I'd love more time to like experience this part without going to the next part yet, you know, that kind of way. And like the feeling the movement and stuff of this, like inside of your body, I haven't even got words to describe what that feels like. It's like wonderment and awe, and you're just like, but then also it's like, oh, of course it's happening. But then, you know, you have these moments of like, I'll be going for a walk and I'll see a baby in a pram. I'm like, there's one of those inside they're like sitting in my pelvic bowl right now. Like this is crazy.
It's mad. Like I know, like you said, you know, of course it's happening. You know what it all is. You know, it's just mad when it's happening to you. It's just totally crazy. And like, how are you dealing with? I mean, you mentioned there even the sort of things about, you know, being your body changing, and for you and your work. I know we're going to talk about that now in a minute, but you know, being your body and being familiar with your body, and I suppose even that change. How are you coping with that? Do you find it a challenge, or have you found any aspects of it a challenge?
Not really. Like I feel like I have been used to my body changing all of the time, like through my entire life. Like my weight has never been stable. I'm someone who fluctuates, you know, depending on, you know, what my lifestyle looks like and how I'm living. So I haven't really found that difficult to navigate at all. For me, it's more so, I have to say, like, I'm very thankful for the amount of movement practices that I have at my disposal, because the amount of change that I have felt, like in terms of like, there's moments where I'm like, I feel like my ligaments are stretching right now, and I can feel exactly which ones are, you know, I can feel like my bones are moving. And I was feeling a lot of that, especially like around the first into second trimester. And I was very thankful that I was really able to follow like the way my body wanted to move. So for me, it's more so, I've been kind of approaching this like just from a place that I kind of approach everything from, just being like extremely curious about like thoughts I'm having, the emotions that I'm feeling, like even having, like these kind of, they feel like hormonal surges to me sometimes, you know, and I'll tell my partner like, okay, prepare.
Brace yourself.
Yeah, prepare yourself. I feel like something's happening, you know. And I'll be very quiet one day, and normally I'm not very quiet, you know, like I'll be a chatterbox, you know, if I'm very quiet. He's like, is everything okay today? And I'm just like, feeling a bit emotional. So just hold on. You know. But it's just been it's a really nice we're like myself and my partner, we're having a lot of fun like during the experience. Like sometimes there's been moments like where I've really just gone crazy, like in terms of like the hormonal feelings that I've had, you know. And he's so good. He's very grounding. I would say like he feels like very earthy to me, you know, and he just kind of lets me go, and then he'll come back in and be like, and everything's okay, you know. And I'm like, yeah,
that's what you need, isn't it? You don't need a fellow hormonal person who's going to go off with you. That's what we all need, this kind of earthy grounding when we're pregnant.
Yeah.
And maybe at other times. Yeah. Maybe at other times.
Yeah, all the time. Let's be honest.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you do, because, you know, we were talking about, you know, you being really busy and having to slow down a little bit. And what is a holistic sex educator? Because this isn't something you set out to become, is it? This is, you didn't have quite a straight. Tell us how you ended up being a holistic
when
sex
someone
educator.
asks you, like people always ask me, like, how did I get into this? And it's like, well, like there wasn't a university degree in this when I was in my 20s, you know, going into
Not
college.
on the CAO.
No. I don't know if I wouldn't have even picked it if it was on the CAO, you know, back then. So the story of how I got into it is actually quite long. So I'll just give you the short version. But essentially, in my early 20s, I started living abroad. I moved to New Zealand first. Then from there, I ended up getting a job in California. And while I was in California, and in when I was in my early 20s, like this is 15 years ago now at this point. So it was a real hub for, you know, sexual openness. It was a very different feeling, a very different experience to what I had had in Ireland, right? Especially around the world of sex. I'd had difficulty with my menstrual cycle since the beginning of time, right? Since it started for me. So I was put on the pill very young. I had a very difficult time. Like whenever I would bleed, it would last for at least 10 days, potentially go over 2 weeks. I'd be on the floor and my life would have to stop, you know? So I never knew that there was a possibility to have a relationship with your menstrual cycle beyond, you know, going on the pill. And when I was in California, I was already practicing a lot of yoga, and I started teaching, and I was in all of these kind of holistic, I suppose, circles, and women were talking about how to have alternative methods actually of engaging with your menstrual cycle. So it started there, and then because I was like, wow, I can ask questions, and some people have different answers, it started opening up my world. And then I obviously then started asking questions about sex, which led me into a workshop in San Francisco on female ejaculation. And then after this, I was like, oh my God, this is absolutely amazing, the way that you can engage with your sexuality and engage with your with sex in general in ways that are extremely open, also fun as well. Like there wasn't this kind of like fear around it, or like, you know, once I was in these kind of settings, it was just incredible. I was shocked at how open everyone was at talking about sex in general. I had never been around these kind of open conversations before, and I just kept having more questions, and eventually the questions that I had led me into courses, they led me into trainings. So I was very interested in trauma training. I ended up going into somatic therapy, and then somatic sex education. And somatic therapy for me was really easy to get my head around. I had come from a background in animation, actually, where that's what I did in university. And for me, animation is like it's like the study of movement, but it's also how do you tell stories through movement. And so when you think about trauma therapy, one of the big things they always say is that, you know, in trauma, our body holds on to these stories. So someone who is, you know, feeling anxious is going to look different, even just sitting down, to someone who's feeling depressed, to someone who's feeling quite happy and content. The language that your body is speaking is available, like, to see, right? And so I was studying this in university, obviously through the form of animation. So for me, this kind of jump into trauma therapy and then somatic therapy was really easy, because I'd already had this kind of background of training my eye to look at how bodies move and things like this. And obviously then when it comes to sex, you know, somatic therapy, just for those of people who don't know, when you think about psychology, it's very much at the level of the mind. So it's talk therapy. But somatic therapy is actually therapy that works in and through the body, right? Okay. So it's, again, the language that your body is using to speak to you. So those cues that your body is giving you all the time. And it makes sense that sex and somatic therapy go really hand in hand, because when you're thinking about things like even like orgasm, orgasm is a sensation that you're experiencing in and through the body, right? So it's basically learning how to learn the language that your body is using to speak to you, so that you can speak back to it. Okay. Right? In a very short way of explaining. So it led me to there. And then essentially I was still traveling all around the world, and I was holding mini workshops. I ended up coming home, and the first workshop that I held in Ireland was in 2016. It was called Orgasm. There was 12 women in the workshop, and what I was finding was the questions that they were asking, or the worries that they had, the concerns that brought them to me in the first place, actually were all things that came from a lack of sex education. And if they had the sex education, they actually wouldn't need me at all. So as a result, I started holding these really small workshops for the people who were coming to me one-on-one, because I was like, I don't need to touch you. You don't need to, like, no one needs to touch you. You don't need to. I was like, you need the information, you know? So I was doing these workshops, and people were, and this was all over the world. And first of all, it wasn't just in Ireland, because everyone needs this information, not just Irish people, right? When I came home, then I started in Ireland, and then obviously then when lockdown happened, I was due to hold one of these classes, and I emailed all the women and I said, look, people are trying this stuff on Zoom. I don't know if this workshop is going to work on Zoom, but we can give it a go. And if it doesn't, sure, we'll be out of lockdown in 6 weeks anyway. Little did we know.
Oh, the innocence.
Yeah. And everyone was like, wow, we've been waiting for months. Like, they were on the wait list for months. They were like, do it. So I happened to put up the rest of the places, because at that point, Zoom, I had 23 women in the class. Zoom let me have 100 participants. Just put the rest of them up on my Instagram story. And at that point, I had less than 2,000 followers, and they were snapped up. And then I had hundreds of messages saying, will you do it again? I missed it. And I put it on again, 100 places snapped up. And then one of my friends, and this is so it'll just go to show you how I wasn't even thinking. One of my friends was like, why don't you up the limit to 500 participants? And I was like, oh yeah, I never thought of doing that. So I did that. 500 places gone, and this was within a couple of weeks, and then it just kept rolling. And the workshops like have, you know, anywhere from a couple of hundred to a couple of thousand people in them, and now we offer replays as well, so there's even more. So I did one this week. There was 9,000 women in it.
9,000.
Yeah.
Wow, that's some number. It shows, I suppose, there is the curiosity and there is the desire for information and knowledge out there. And do you think maybe Zoom makes it a little bit easier for women to do it, because if they're still embarrassed? And is it it's always women?
No, well, now it's expanded to everybody.
Yeah.
Like, I started doing this. It's like a show. It's an online show. The sex toy show before Christmas, and I do it like, you know, it's like the adult version of the toy show, right? Like, we never stop wanting to play either. We just socially acceptable to not play, right? But in
There's so many things I want to say there that are just not appropriate for a sex toy show or any reference to the toy show at all.
No. But I wanted to do that in 2020, but I knew I wouldn't be able to, you know, that year, you know. So for me, it's been this very kind of taking one step at a time with it. So now everyone is in the workshops. People bring their partners, and we do couples workshops, and it's really open to anyone who wants to learn, you know. So yeah.
So we have really changed then from what you thought Ireland was like.
Oh yeah.
Versus maybe where we are now around those conversations. Well, I suppose because you're pregnant now, I presume you are getting a lot of questions from parents around pregnancy sex, or even sex as parents. Is there anything that you can maybe offer? Have you thought about doing workshops like that for pregnant women, or for parents afterwards who are maybe looking to?
It's so funny, because as soon as I announced I was pregnant, I had like a flood of DMs being like, are you going to do the sex post babies and sex during pregnancy? You know, and you know, the questions that I get a lot around, let's say, sex during pregnancy would be like, is it safe to have sex during pregnancy? Also around how do people cope with their body image and their body changing? And then the other one would be sex positions are huge, right? So trying to find comfortable positions for your body, especially as it's starting to grow. And you know, there's and then there's also then the questions of, like, you know, that you're during pregnancy, you know, that you're having huge hormonal shifts, and there may be an increased desire to have sex, or you may experience a lack of desire altogether, where you're just like, I'm just not interested. And I mean, there's so many things that when it comes to sex in general, and how you maintain a sexual relationship with yourself and with your partner throughout your life as things change. But there are a couple of principles that I think are really great, and you can apply to all areas of your life, regardless of whether you're pregnant, regardless of whether you've had babies, you haven't had babies. And some of the things that I would be saying to people would be, first of all, it's really important to look at your motivation behind having sex, right? So we have sex for lots of different reasons, and depending on what's happening in our lives, like that, those reasons change, right? So some of us have sex to relieve stress, or potentially it is to experience an emotional closeness with a partner, or to experience that sense of intimacy. Maybe it's a part of the way that you experience feeling loved, or maybe it's even a way that you express love itself. And obviously then the list goes on, right? There's so many motivations for it. And when you look at the motivations for sex, then suddenly if issues come up, or if difficulties arise, it means that you can start to look at, like, are there other ways that I could potentially relieve stress, right? Rather than just going for what we know and what we've done in the past. Or if I'm looking for, actually, if the reason why I want to have sex is that I'm looking for intimacy and connection, are there other ways to do this without, again, like having to have penis and vagina sex, which is what most people relate to when they talk about sex. And the second thing would be then is to expand your definition of what sex looks like. Because when we talk about, if we were to ask someone, like, what does sex look like for you? Most of the time, particularly in heterosexual relationships, you're talking about penetrative sex, right? Penis and vagina sex. But sex is so much more than that. If you go to lesbian couples, for example, and think about, like, well, what does sex look like for them? There's no penis there, right? Unless it's a dildo or a strap-on or something like this. So what's sex in that situation, right? When you start to expand your definition of what sex looks like, it has so many benefits to your life in ways that I don't know if I could fully explain to you. But essentially, one of the biggest things that it does is it relieves the pressure of sex off the relationship, right? And penetrative sex in particular. So, for example, if you're like asking yourself questions like, would you consider kissing sex? Would you consider kissing with clothes off sex? Would you consider hugging sex? Well, would you consider hugging with clothes off sex? And there's no right or wrong answer here. Like, would you consider a massage sex? Would you consider like a massage with clothes off, like I'm more erotic? Would you consider that sex, right? So you start to widen your frame of reference for what sex is, which means then that you're pulling the pressure off. So if, for example, during pregnancy, you're feeling too tired, like the fatigue levels are extreme, right? You're feeling too tired. If there might be complications and it has been recommended that you do not have penetrative sex, but you still want to have that closeness, when you start to expand that definition, it means that you can engage sexually with each other in other ways. And so those are two things that I would be like really saying, like, learn to do this. It's so beneficial for every single relationship. And then with regards to positions, I think without showing you the positions, it's hard to give people an example. But I do a workshop called Woman on Top, and part of that this is to this day one of the most popular workshops that I have, and the reason it is popular is because it give people really very simple ways to change the positioning of their body so that the way that they're engaging in sex is actually comfortable for them and also pleasurable for the woman that's in the on top position. A lot of the time, even if you're not pregnant, being on top can feel quite difficult because you might have to have like strong thighs in terms of the way most people approach it. Your hips might be too tired, or else you might actually, because of the limitations in your hips, you might not be able to get into that position. So it's very simple ways of adjusting your body so that you can sustain movement in a way that feels good for you.
Like, as you're saying all that, I suppose, and we're thinking about maybe the woman being pregnant and moving around, you're going to have in heterosexual relationships, you're going to have the man there maybe feeling, she's pregnant, do I need to be more careful? There's a lot of there's an awful lack of education, isn't there, around sex, I suppose, as a whole, but also around sex and pregnancy. And that's maybe something that people, again, are afraid maybe to ask information about.
Yeah, and this is the other thing, right? Like, when we lack sex education, or when the sex education we've had is rooted in fear and prevention, right? And also when there is a lack of conversation, like normal conversation around sex publicly, like in society, sex becomes something that we think is secret, and this is really where we've come from, right? I've obviously seen a big change in Ireland, and that, like, even since 2020 when I went online, the difference in the conversations that I've been having with people are, like, I always say this, like, one of the first interviews that I had in 2020 for a really well-known paper, the person who was interviewing me was like, I won't be able to say any of these words, and like the word she was referring to is vagina and vulva. She's like, I won't be able to say any of those words.
Oh my God.
Even then, like, we've come a very long way. And even as well, like, you know, at the types of questions that people were asking me, like, they were much more limited to what they're asking me now. So I've seen a huge shift in Ireland. But when there is a lack of conversation, there is a secrecy around sex. And also, we don't have the models of how to communicate about sex well, right? So therefore, we actually don't know how to ask questions. We don't know what questions to ask. We're afraid to ask the wrong question because it's about sex, right? So it's incredibly vulnerable. We're afraid to say the wrong thing. So when we don't have those models of conversation, it's harder to approach. It's harder to approach when you have worries and fears, and it's also harder to approach if issues do arise, right? So I think one of the good things about having these conversations more openly and also having them more available and accessible to people is that people start to hear that, oh, it's okay to talk about sex. And actually, it's not shameful to talk about sex, or it isn't seedy to talk about sex. It's just like any other conversation, you know?
It's funny you said that thing about shame there, because I'm talking to parents all the time, and we talk about anything and everything, and trying to conceive comes up a lot when people are talking to you, and they might have different worries. And I'll sometimes have strangers reach out to me, and a few times I've had somebody say, I'm so ashamed to even say this. And they're, in this case, you're talking about all the different reasons people have sex, and for this reason, it's to have a baby. This is what these parents are setting out to do. But the one thing that a lot of them have struggled with is saying how much of a chore it becomes, that when they're trying to have a baby, particularly if it goes on for a while, is there a way that parents can, or would-be parents can try and make sex still fun as well as functional when it's all become around what time of the month it is, ovulating, you're going to be home at 4 o'clock, I need your sperm, you know. How do you move from that and try and keep it still magic?
Yeah, well, this is such a big topic. It's one of the big questions that I get asked about as well. And so something that I want to say as well is, if you just think back to your sex education, and you were probably told, like, it's fear-based. So you're told, like, if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant. Yes. So we go into our adult life thinking that it's going to be really easy to get pregnant, right? And obviously we know now with the huge kind of focus and visibility on conception and the difficulties and struggles people are having, the fact that people are more open talking about it, we know that that's not always the case, right? So I think sometimes there's this element of, like, feeling broken as well that comes with, you know, especially if you're trying for a long time. And it's just to say that, like, look at the sex education. You were told, like, you were literally lied to when you were a kid to say, oh, it's really simple. The first time you use sex, you're going to get pregnant, right? Which is not the case for everybody. So the second thing with regards to sex becoming a chore. So I always talk about the idea of the productivity mindset versus the pleasure mindset, right? And the productivity mindset, this exists in all parts of our society. It's how we grow up. And really, culture promotes the productivity mindset because it says to us that we're only valuable when we're producing something. So we think about work, right? Yeah. And then we have this kind of achievement addiction on top of that. So we have to go to the next step on the ladder, the next step on the ladder. We have to continually be producing in order to be valuable. And this mindset leaks into our sex lives as well, right? So where we're only valuable when we're producing an orgasm, for example, right? So think of the amount of people who fake having an orgasm because they don't want to feel like they're less than, or that there's something wrong with them, or the amount of pressure that's put on having an orgasm in a sexual encounter, right? Because if you're not producing an orgasm, it means there's something wrong with you, or you're not quite good enough, right? Or there's, you're not quite good enough. The other thing of that, the other part of sex in that is also producing a baby, right? So again, if that's not happening for us right away, if we're struggling with this, if we're needing to have extra support and help, then again, it's this idea that you're not valuable, there's this like a feeling again of not being good enough. So it's learning how to switch people from the productivity mindset to the pleasure mindset. So the pleasure mindset is about, and if we think about, right, when it comes to, if we live in the productivity mindset, pleasure comes as an after to all of that. So I'm going to go to the gym for 5 days this week so that I can have my cheat meal on Saturday.
Yeah.
If I don't go because I'm tired or something crops up, and I go 3 times and I still have my cheat meal on Saturday, I will generally take a stick and beat myself up over it. And then we think about this word like guilty pleasure. It's like, it's like, oh, had an ice cream, oh, guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to go home now and have a bag of crisps and a glass of wine, and it's a guilty pleasure that you're going to sit down, relax and do something that you feel pleasures you, right? So generally pleasure only comes as a result of having produced something, right? So it's about flipping that narrative altogether and learning how to put pleasure at the center of your experience again, not because it's a side to whatever you're experiencing or whatever you're doing in the week, but because actually we know that all systems function better. It doesn't matter what gender you are, how you express that gender, all systems function better when pleasure is in them. Your cardiovascular system, your immune system, your reproductive system, right? So it's learning how to, and that's a mindset shift first. So how do you invite more pleasure in your life in a way that you're not restricting it, you don't feel guilty? And that's often a really, really big thing for people. And the other thing as well that I would also say is, like, again, learning sex skills is a really fun way to start to add, to start to make sex feel a little bit fun. So I do sex skills on, as I said, like the blowjob workshops or the hand job ones, and then also like techniques for self pleasure and other techniques then for, going down on your partner and learning how to pleasure them. And these are really good skills to learn, because the thing about sex is that we are taught and we are made to believe that sex is just something that we are supposed to know how to do, right? That it's kind of just like you're given no information and you're thrown to the wolves, and you're supposed to, navigate the vulnerability and the embarrassments as well that come in your early 20s, when you're experimenting, and you're supposed to navigate all of this and just try and, with no help whatsoever, figure it out. In no other area of our life are we expected to do that. We are not expected to do that when it comes, if we think about any other skill that we want to learn, even if it's something like art or something like this, right? You can be given an easel and a paint brush and some paint and you can work away, but generally it's going to be a pretty shit painting, right? Like until someone teaches you, right, these are some techniques, this is the brush that you would use for this type of paint. Maybe you find then that you're actually not very good at oil paint, but you're better at watercolor, right? So again, there's so many things within that sphere and way of learning, but it's generally accepted that first of all, you don't know what you're doing. So the first couple of times it's okay if you make mistakes. It's okay if you, produce a shit painting, for example. And that if you get a teacher, you're more than likely going to learn some really good skills, some really good methods that you then can put into practice to become a better painter. But it's not translated, that isn't translated to sex. There's this idea that if we have to ask questions about sex, if we have to say like, I actually don't really know how to give a blowjob, or I actually don't really know how to finger, can I say that? How to finger someone.
You can say that. We allow that.
Okay. I don't really know how to do this. It's generally this idea that, oh, well, if you're asking those questions, it means you're bad at it, which means you're bad at sex. And then there's this stigma around this idea that you're bad at sex, right? That you're going to end up alone forever if you admit that. So we tend to hide these questions that we have.
I just can't see that conversation happening at the school gates, though. I just can't. Because have we moved on enough to be able? Like, is the expectation realistic?
I think it depends on who you're talking to. I think maybe it might not happen at the school gate right now, but again, that depends on who you're speaking to. Like with the sex skill workshops that I have, like there are thousands of people in these workshops. They said I had one last year, 3,000 people. It sold out in an hour. Right.
Yeah.
And people are bringing their partners to those workshops as well, because it's like, it's something fun to do.
Yeah.
You know, it's something fun to learn. And if you think about the pressure, like we spoke about earlier, the one thing you need to learn how to do is learn how to take the pressure off sex. If you're thinking about the pressure that comes along with trying to conceive, learning how to give each other an erotic massage, learning how to touch your partner's body in a way that works for them, like learning touch techniques, learning new ways, right, to pleasure a penis or pleasure a vulva, is actually really, like, the process of learning actually can bring a lot of fun and laughter. One of the things that I always say, like when it comes to sex skills, is that in order to do that, you need to learn how to take sexual perfection off the table. Yeah. Because again, a lot of the time, the reason we'll stop ourselves from learning anything new is because we're afraid to be bad at it, you know?
Do you think have you any tips at all, Jenny, though, for people when they do become parents and when time is of the essence and when they really want to maybe get their sex life back on track? Because you'll have so many parents tell you that finding that time to have sex, are so tired after maybe being busy all day. We're back to the whole body image thing again, that a lot of people will have hang-ups around body image, especially if it's only a short while after giving birth. And then you've got maybe male partners who are afraid, or female partners who are afraid to put pressure on the person who has just given birth and the woman's just given birth, because they're going, well, she's recovering, or she's tired. And there's that risk of maybe feeling rejected, I suppose. There's the whole fallout that can happen. Yeah. The whole different rabbit hole maybe that people can go down in the worry that they're being rejected in some way if you can't make that time for sex. So how do you fit it in?
Yeah, so I actually do have workshops coming out on this, because even the questions you've asked, like this is a couple of hours of a conversation that we could have. But some of the smaller tips that I would give, right, would be, first of all, earlier on when we spoke about sex during pregnancy, those things of looking at your motivation behind why you have sex, also learning to expand your definition of sex is really important, again, for taking the pressure off. Because regardless of what kind of birth you have had, it may be the case that you do not want to be touched, right? Yeah. And I especially if you're in a heterosexual relationship, I mean, I haven't experienced it yet, but even the feeling of it, the thought of it, the idea of, something coming out of my vaginal canal and then a very short while later, someone else like pumping inside of it. Like, I'm just like, that is not an idea that feels enticing, right? So learning how to expand your definition of sex beyond penis and vagina sex is going to be really important, because again, you're still kind of you're still enhancing the connection, the reason why you're having sex, in terms of those emotional connections. It's also really important as well, like particularly when you've had a baby, that you're learning how to be a team, right, in that regard as well. So it means that when maybe you come home and you see your partner is exhausted because they've been minding the baby all day, you don't have to necessarily go towards sex, but you can still keep a sexual connection where it's like, do you know what, like, lie down, let me give you a massage. And the massage can be a sensual massage. It can be a massage that helps support, relieving stress from the body. It can also, like, I mean, imagine, it's so nice when you feel tired to have someone's hands on your body, right? To just be like, I'm just going to hold you, right? Things that I would say for that is really important to, like, turn the TV off, right? So that would be a really important thing to do, so that you're just focusing on what it is that you're actually doing. Like, there's different types of touch as well. Like, if someone is feeling very unmotivated or even deflated, the kind of like tickly, light feather-like touches are really good for alivening and waking someone's body. If someone's feeling exhausted and tired, more firm and longer held touch is going to really support someone in relieving stress and relieving tension. Another thing as well, when it comes to post babies, is like the tiredness is a real thing. I get asked about it all the time. And when we think about what happens when we're tired, first of all, we haven't got the energy, the reserves in our body to actually go towards a sexual experience because everything feels exhausting. And we have different, what's the word that I want to use here? We have different priorities and different responsibilities. And if the sex that we're having isn't alluring, then we're going to prioritize different things, like sleep, right?
Yeah, of course.
So learning how to approach sex in a way that is alluring, right, for you and your partner, that looks like learning how to remove the sexual scripts that you have around sex. So sexual script theory is this idea that, again, if we ask people what does sex look like, generally they're describing steps of, well, it will probably start with foreplay, then it will move to penis and vagina sex, and then sometimes people will talk about aftercare, but oftentimes it stops, with an orgasm, someone orgasming. So it's learning how to change your definition of sex to a concept of sex, because the problem with the definition of sex means, and sexual script theory means that sex, there's no novelty in it, right? When there's no novelty in it, when we know what we're expecting, sex is less alluring, right? And again, we'll start to prioritize other sex. So learning sex skills, an amazing thing that you can do in order to flip that. The other thing about tiredness is that it's going to affect your body hormonally. So it's also you yourself relieving the pressure from yourself to feel like you have to have sex. There is a research study done on women who had given birth and how quickly they return to oral sex because they are feeling obligated to have some kind of sexual connection with their partner, and maybe penetration is off the table for them for whatever reason, but they return to oral sex really, really quickly. And the tone behind that is that, well, I have to, right? And when sex becomes an obligation, it is one of the quickest ways for your sexual relationship to die, right? So it's really important, again, that you're aware of that for yourself, because oftentimes, like, we don't think about the bigger picture, like in 20 years down the line, like, do you want to be with this person? Do you want to have a fulfilling sex life with this person 20 years? So you have to make sure that what you're doing in the moment is not setting yourself up for failure for that.
Like, I'm just thinking here, and I have to be honest, even when we were going to record the podcast, I was just thinking how much my teenagers are going to love this. They're going to love their mammy. They're going to love their mammy recording the podcast on social media talking about sex. I mean, what more could a teenager want? And I suppose talking about, teenagers and older kids, and I'm not going to embarrass mine anymore, but if you are going to have those conversations around sex, have you any idea, any tips or advice for parents into how they can have conversations about sex with their children? How much should they be telling them?
Yeah, well, it's actually very interesting. The fear around talking to kids about sex is actually coming from our own lack of sex education, or else the fear-based sex education that we received. But actually, it's recommended that you're speaking openly about sex in your household with even very young children. And so obviously the types of conversations are different, but they are even saying the research is that from 3 to 4, you're teaching your children the correct names for their body parts, and this is incredibly important for a number of different reasons. It's also teaching them that there's no secrecy right around their genitals and this, and that also that channel of communication begins to open already. And then as they get older, you're continuing to have those conversations. One of the biggest things that they say as well is that, especially around teenagers, that you and your partner or whoever it is in your household, that there's this open conversation around sex. So one of the biggest things when people ask me about, like, how do I talk to my kids around sex? I always say the best thing you can do is learn to remove the shame and stigma that you have around talking about sex, because this will transfer to them. When you remove that shame and stigma and you find that, like, actually sex can just be any other type of conversation, they start to receive that information as well. One of the things that I'll say is that I had terrible sex education in school, but my parents were really open about talking about sex around me, around my sister, around my brother. And, it wasn't done in a weird way in any way, shape or form, but it was essentially like, sitting at the dinner table, you would be absorbing lots of different types of conversations. So, conversations about school or about your friends, or, what what you're doing for the weekend, and then there might be a joke or something like this around sex, you know. So for me, it was always very clear that if I had an issue or I had a problem, I would be able to approach my parents. Now, I didn't want to engage in the conversation around sex with my parents. I was the person that would like have my fingers in my ear being like, la 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 la, I'm not listening. I'd leave the room, you know. It became a joke at one point, like to see, you know, how quickly I was going to leave the room when the sex conversation started. But I also was extraordinarily open about sex with my peers, because at that age, your teenagers will want to talk to their peers more than they want to talk to you, right? One really good tip that I have for parents with teenagers is leaving books about sex around the house, because your teenagers are curious. They will open them, and you know, having the right books is on the table as well. I have a blog post about this on my website, so people can look up some of those books. And you yourself as well, like reading books about the teenage experience, they're having a very different experience to us now than we did, you know, when we were teens. So it's really good to like be updated with like the way that they're absorbing sexual culture, right? Which is, I mean, for us, we didn't have social media. It didn't exist. It didn't exist for me. It definitely didn't. Like, it didn't exist for so many parents at the moment. And what that meant is that our peer group was a lot smaller. It was more home-based. Their peer group is now global. So they're looking at Instagram, they're looking at TikTok, all these things. And what you learn in teenage years is how to use your sexuality as a currency. So you exchange it for popularity, for friendship, you know, for love even, right?
Isn't that actually depressing?
It's, you know, it's worrying, but there are ways to manage it.
Okay. I mean, you're saying this and it's so right. It's so, you know, if anybody who's got teenagers or anyone at all is on social media and you're so aware of how they are bombarded with information and sexuality, and their sexuality is something that is really presented to them from a very young age, maybe far younger than they are ready to deal with it and absorb it. And just when you talk about it being exchanged in currency like that, it is. But there's ways to deal with it. You're going to tell us the ways to deal with it.
But it also is like it's an important thing for parents to understand, you know, to understand like that it is important to engage with your children about what they're looking at online, and even just preparing them. And this is why there's a lot of talk at the moment, not just around the conversation around consent, but actually around porn literacy, right? Teaching your children how to be able to digest and even mentally understand what it is that they might come across online, right? Because it's so much more available. You know, one of the things like that I say to my partner, I'm like, they're never having phones, they're never having tablets, but I know it's not possible, it's not, exactly. Right? So, but you know, and also as well, like I would be really saying as well, like looking at the school system as well, it's not just about educating them within schools. Like obviously, I think home education around sexuality is really important, because you also get to manage that relationship, you know, depending on what your comfort zones are as well.
I suppose it's that kind of difficulty, isn't it, about, or maybe it is that when you talk about our own kind of level of discomfort sometimes, and but it's also about maybe recognizing that your teens don't necessarily, as you pointed out so accurately, they don't necessarily want to have those conversations with you. Might absorb the information from you, but they don't necessarily want to have those. So going, I'm not a regular mom, I'm a cool mom, isn't going to wash. It's not going to wash when it comes to talking about these things in a sit down way, really. You know, it's not going to work that way. It's
but being aware that they're listening to the way that you are speaking about sex. They're also listening to the way that you and your partner speak about sex. And they're also, and one of the things that I will say is that particularly in heterosexual relationships, this conversation tends to fall on, like the responsibility tends to fall to the mother, right? Or to the female in the relationship. And what I would be saying,
things.
And what I would be saying is like, it's really important that if your partner is male, that he is also engaging and open with these conversations around kids as well. Like that just because, you know, you're going to talk to your daughter about her menstrual cycle doesn't mean that you leave it to the mother alone. That like it's important that, you know, your daughter knows that actually, well, she can come to you, right? If the mother isn't available, she can come to you, right? And speak to you. So that there's more people in her network, right? As well. so that's, you know, one thing I would just say, I'd love people to take away from that.
Could I ask you about your show, Sexed Up? I want your live show. What's that like?
Yeah. Oh, do you know what was so funny? That actually came about because we were online.
Yeah.
There was thousands of people coming to online workshops. And originally, so before I offered the recording and the replay, a lot of people were coming, you know, in person, or they were coming to the workshop, and it was live. It was happening in the moment. And you can't see anybody in these workshops, right? You don't even see a list of names. There's nothing like this, but there's a chat box, and I always encourage people to be in the chat box. And the chat box, I swear, it's the place that I would like to be when I'm in the workshops, because there's so much crack that happens in there. I basically was like, do you know what? Like, I don't know if this is going to work as an in-person thing, but like, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted as well, like, Sexed Up to be more than just kind of like sit on the couch and have a conversation. I really wanted it to be a show.
Yeah.
And I really wanted it to kind of give people an idea of, like, you know, I suppose nuggets of how they can be sexually creative, right? And then also just have a lot of fun, like good night out, you know? So we ended up putting it on in Vicar Street, and the tickets sold out in 90 seconds, which I was shocked by, because then I got loads
90 seconds?
Yeah.
Oh my
I got
God.
so many messages from people being like, Ticketmaster is down. And I was like, oh, let me check, you know, and see what the story is. So I called the Ticketmaster person, the count person, and they were like, oh no, it's sold out. And they were like, you actually have enough people in the queue to sell out five more nights.
God.
Do you have more dates? And I was like, let's just, I need to slow down. I need to do one show. Like, I've never been on stage before, you know, so I was like, let's just do one show and see what happens. And then we were actually supposed to do more shows in September, a bunch of them around, but then with the pregnancy, I wasn't able to do it in September. There was something happened, so I was like, I need to prioritize my health and prioritize the health of the pregnancy as well. So but they are going to come back on, not right away, but we're looking at dates in September. So, but it's essentially, like, it's a really good fun night. I've traveled all around the world, and I've met so many really interesting people in the sex space. And I basically wanted to bring some of them to Ireland, you know, to just show people, like, this is what's available to you. So we had
can you give me some clue as to what people can expect?
Like, we had in the last one, we had someone who was an intimacy coordinator, so worked on porn sets, but actually this was ethical porn, very female focused porn. So it was, she was incredible, and you know, we spoke about porn literacy as well. And then I have these women that I know who are amazing performers, and I essentially asked them to choreograph very specific scenes for me. So one of them was like what it looks like to dominate. The other one was like sense play, so sensual play, which is like playing with, or sorry, sensation play. And this particular one was playing with candles, like, so wax play. So what that would look like, we had a scent DJ who basically creates his own scents. I actually collaborated with him to create my own pheromone perfume, which we gave out on the night. And the amount of messages that I've had about this pheromone perfume, it's essentially supposed to like activate arousal. And I did it because more out of curiosity, because I love experimenting, and I love buying all these kind of things that tell me they're going to do something and activate sex in some way for me. And I was finding they weren't working. And I was like, I wonder what the science is behind pheromones, and is it possible to do something that's better? So I ended up collaborating with him. And, you know, one of the funny stories was that when he sent me the samples, I was spraying them around my house, and my partner and I weren't living together at the time, but I was spraying them around my house over a couple of days. And I sprayed number 4, which was the last one that I sprayed. And my partner was coming over to make dinner, and he came into the room, and we were having a chit chat, and like, he's very opposite to me, like I'm very open, I'll talk about anything, you know, and he's not like this, you know. But then we started having a conversation, and it was so funny, because I swear to God, like, it was like his eyes turned black, like, you know, like a shark, you know, the way you see they're about to pounce. And then like, we just had an amazing experience together. And so
they worked.
So that one worked. So I literally the next day I emailed him, and I was like, it's number 4. So and so we did that, and I had so many messages being like, oh my God, what the hell is in this spray? So it wasn't just me that experienced it, you know. So we had those kind of things
So
at the
forget
show.
Chanel number 5. It's Jenny Keane number 4. That's all we all need.
Yeah, I was like calling it pheromone, as in like the moan part. But
So what is next then for the Orgasm Queen?
for I have more workshops coming out, but they'll be on demand because obviously I'm going to be focusing on me and what's happening for me personally. And then we have shows later on in the year as well, and I have an online toy shop, and I've started producing like some of my own products as well. Aside, I'm within that toy shop, so it's not sex toys, just in case people start to get excited about that. Like, I think the sex toy industry is flooded enough, you know. I think I really love sex toy products that are already out there, but for me it's more like I created a sex blanket, for example, that went on sale last year, and it's going really well. The spray is coming out in a couple of months' time. I have other kind of connection cards almost, which are actually really good for sexual communication and having those conversations with your partner. So, I mean, there's lots happening. It's just,
busy woman.
Yeah, I'm always busy.
Well, I'm going to extract some more information from you now with my quick fire questions. Are you ready for this, Jenny? Are you ready? Romantic meal in and maybe more. What are you cooking?
My partner's cooking. He's the cook.
Oh, he's a cook.
He's the chef.
Okay. What's your hidden talent?
My hidden talent. I'm a pretty good artist. Yeah, I can draw pretty well.
Okay, so we'll watch that space too. What's the one thing every woman should own?
What's the one thing every woman should own? I do think every woman should own a sex toy.
A sex toy? Any particular sex toy?
I think that depends on you. It depends on you. It depends on your body. It depends on what type of pleasure you like. But there's so many available. But I definitely think a finger vibrator is always good.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a small one. It's handy to have in your pocket. You can take it away with you, you know, on a sexy getaway or whatever.
Have your finger vibrator with you at
and you
all
can
times.
use it on yourself or your partner, you know.
Okay. So you heard it here first. The one thing everyone
can surprise them.
Surprise, Jenny Keane. It has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for talking to us, and I'm looking forward to hearing of baby's safe arrival.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, so keep us posted.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. A big thank you to Jenny Keane for joining us for today's episode. We would love to continue reaching new listeners, so if you've enjoyed it, please do share and tell a friend. And if there's a guest that you'd love us to have on, get in touch via aldi.ie/mamia.